thank you very much for that very warm introduction, which proves that not all forms of inflation are painful. So I also didn't realize that I arrived here in the midst of a drought. So that was a pleasant surprise. And I'm going to start out with a little bit of theory. I was trained as an academic economist, and Ronald Reagan once said that an economist is someone who, upon observing that something works in practice, wonders whether it works in theory. So I have to start out with a little bit of a theoretical rationale as to why we have initiatives to support innovation, not just at universities, but in general, and why we have initiatives to support technology-based economic development, which is essentially the theme of the conference that we're having here today. Then I will segue into a discussion of the role of the university, because I think the university is the key intermediary in taking innovation to the marketplace. If the universities are doing their jobs effectively, then the innovations that are developed at the universities and elsewhere, and the ideas that are developed on campus, will be realized in the marketplace commercially. Now, I have the good fortune to serve as president of the Technology Transfer Society, which is really dedicated to the identification and dissemination of best practices in technology transfer and commercialization, and all of the initiatives surrounding academic entrepreneurship. So then I'm going to try to present you with some of the lessons that have been learned for industry, academia, and government on how to do this in an effective way. So I think you might find that interesting. And then I'll do what academics and deans do best, and that, of course, is engage in a little bit of shameless self-promotion of some of the initiatives that we've launched, and also some of the dissemination outlets that might, if you're interested in learning more about best practices, I'll put in a little plug for those outlets as well. But I have to start out with a little bit of theory, and I was attracted to the subject of economics in part because I came across the work of the great Austrian economist who eventually taught at Harvard, named Joseph Schumpeter. And everyone in this room has taken at least one economics course, or maybe several. And you may have noticed that 99% of the attention in that course is focused on price competition. Economics is essentially the analysis of competition, the analysis of markets. And there's a great stress on price competition. And what was interesting about Schumpeter is that he was the first major economist to really focus on the importance of innovation. And he argued that it was really competition through innovation that is most important in terms of firm performance and in terms of societal economic performance. He also talked about the role of the entrepreneur and argued that innovation and entrepreneurship lead to creative destruction, the displacement of old technologies with new technologies. Now, as a graduate student and then as a postdoc, I had the good fortune to work with or to be exposed to the ideas of three great economists who built on Schumpeter's legacy by studying the economics of innovation. And basically, they studied the diffusion of innovation. Most importantly, they quantified the fact that R&D and innovation is a critical source of firm performance as well as economic growth. And they also talked about the role of the university and the importance of technology transfer. Now, the reason why this is all important is both to firms and to society is because of the fact that innovation leads to benefits to the firm and it leads to benefits to society. But I want to step back a little bit and talk about the role of government in innovation and why there is government intervention. And then that's going to segue into a discussion of evaluation, because I think that what's missing from a lot of the initiatives and programs is evaluation, explicit evaluation of the effectiveness. If we are here today, as it says on the sign, to talk about best practices, we can't do that without evaluation. And this can occur at the firm level, it can occur at a broader level, and that's really what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. Why do governments intervene? I think the first reason is that you just heard the Vice President for Innovation talk about this, that knowledge is a public good, okay? Which means that it can be used by many people, we can't charge a price for it. And the second reason why there is market failure is because of the tremendous technological and commercial uncertainty associated with investment in research, especially basic early stage research. Also, we know that there are complementary assets that are required for the successful development and implementation of innovation, which may not be provided in the marketplace. And then finally, we have spillovers or externalities, which are positive in this sense, because technology is something that's good. It generally leads to new products, new processes that have some benefits to many, many people, even people who didn't pay for it, right? That's really what we mean in this context by externalities, which are positive. What does the government do? The government does many things. It finances some types of research. It constitutes the lead user. The first mainframe computer was used by the US government to conduct the 1950 census. Government is typically the lead user for certain types of military-based technologies. The internet basically was first used by the government, again, in the US. Government can also provide complementary assets, infrastructure, which is critical to the development of the new innovation. Government can establish price and quantity regulations. The major types of involvement here are those relating to the subsidization of R&D. R&D tax credits, for example. Why do we have that? Because we believe that it's a good thing. We want to subsidize it, so we want to give firms an incentive to do more of it. And then there are other regulations that might have some impact on innovation. Some economists think that environmental regulation, for example, stimulates additional technological innovation. But again, let's get back to first principles. Why are we doing this? We're doing it, why is government involved? Why do we need to have these programs? Because we believe that the social returns, the returns that accrue to society, exceed those that return to the individual inventor or the individual firm. And thus, the private sector, from a societal perspective, is under-investing in R&D, so we have to intervene and take some action. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but why does this happen? It's difficult to evaluate and fund certain types of research, especially the early stage research. Some nations choose to subsidize certain strategic industries. Some of the Asian countries have been very effective in targeting certain sectors, high technology sectors, that they want to develop. And then we have imperfections in the labor market and with respect to human capital. That's a major reason, again, why we subsidize, let's say, certain types of higher education. And I would argue that we should, if we are going to subsidize certain types of higher education, it should be those that lead to innovation and entrepreneurship. So again, this is all about the innovation. Who's receiving this support? Well, I like to think of things in terms of units of analysis, right? And so there's really two types of units of analysis here. One would be at the agent level, the individuals. Those would be the scientists in industry, the scientists at the university. Now we have public sector venture capital programs and entrepreneurship programs, so even individual entrepreneurs are receiving some funding. I'll talk about that in a minute because I think that's something that's very useful. And then we have institutions, and there's a wide range of institutions, many based at universities, tech transfer offices, of course, property-based institutions like incubators, accelerators, science technology parks, and then companies also are receiving, companies that do certain types of research are receiving public support. Now, I am a firm believer that any agent or institution that's receiving public support, and that includes many of the people in this room, have an obligation to, at some point, or someone has an obligation to do an evaluation. And that means really trying to figure out, if our objective is to maximize the social return on investment in innovation, then we have to be able to figure out exactly where those social returns are the highest. And the only way we can do that is by doing an evaluation. And this is critical because a lot of times what we want to do as government agents is target those programs and those projects, let's say, that generate the highest social returns and where firms are unlikely to invest. And that can only be done through this type of rigorous analysis. One of the, I think, most interesting developments in this field has been the development of building evaluation into the design of programs. So the example that I use here is from the Advanced Technology Program in the United States, which was actually designed by one of the gentlemen that I mentioned before. It had economic evaluation built into the design. And I'll describe what that evaluation was. Because we have applied it. I am working for the National Research Council, I guess for the last 8 years. We are doing a systematic analysis of a very interesting public sector venture capital program called the Small Business Innovation Research Program and Small Business Technology Transfer Program. Many of these startups are based at universities. And we are using some of the principles in our evaluation that I'll describe to you. And we have some results. We have some lessons learned from that. Now, the interesting thing about evaluation is, economists are not used to talking to their data points. We're very lazy. We usually rely on the government to collect information. But it turns out that qualitative analysis is very important in the study of innovation and entrepreneurship. And many of the lessons that we've learned, I think, are not just coming from statistical analyses, but from the field research. So you have to do both. You have to have multiple indicators of outcomes, outputs, success. You have to be mindful of the time frame. Many programs that are used to support R&D and innovation are supporting early stage types of research, which are not very close to the marketplace. So you want to think about the time frame, and you really want to take a long-term analysis and do a very rigorous type of longitudinal analysis of the effectiveness of the program. Any indicators that you have will vary depending on the unit of analysis, and I'll describe what I mean by that, because there are different ways of measuring the outputs and the outcomes, depending on whether you're looking at the agents or the institutions. And then what always plagues us in the social sciences is if we're evaluating the effectiveness of some kind of program, which from a scientific standpoint you could think of as a treatment, is what type of control group do you have? What are you comparing your recipients to certain types of non-recipients? Well, where are you drawing that sample? How do you develop this control group? Here are some of the measures that have been used. I'm an economist, so I tend to think of the whole world as a production function, which means that you have outputs and you have inputs or resources that you use to generate the outputs. What would be the resources that are relevant in this context? First would be those that relate to labor, and that can be measured in different ways. The scientific input, the manpower that's devoted to the scientific research, and maybe the commercialization. And then the capital side, the equipment, the facilities that are used in the research. And then outputs, which are more short-term in nature. Those would be the projects that are funded by the initiative, collaborative relationships that arise as a result of the funded research. That was one way we measured the effectiveness of the program, is were the researchers more likely to then collaborate with other researchers, and did it lead to more RJVs and all kinds of different types of research collaborations? And then we have the measures of scientific output, which in the short term would be publications, and then commercial measures of the outputs of the research, which would be patenting, licensing, other types of models and algorithms that might have some value either from a scientific standpoint or from a commercial standpoint. And of course, new products and new processes. These I would consider to be the intermediate outputs. Then we have what I think of as the long-term sort of outcomes, which are probably of most relevance to policymakers or who's ever supporting the program or the initiative. Those would be, from the scientific standpoint, the long-term measure of the effectiveness of the research is going to be the citations. And you'll notice that I include both articles and patents, because patents can be cited. Actually, in the academic literature, we measure the value of a patent often by how often it's cited. That's the best measure that we have of the market value of, in effect, the market value of the patent. The presentations and other forms of dissemination. The recent Carnegie Mellon study has documented the fact that one of the most important mechanisms of technology transfer and knowledge transfer between, let's say, the university and industry are presentations, not formal mechanisms of intellectual property protection and the subsequent exploitation of that, but these more informal modes of technology transfer. Revenue created by the new products. When we looked at the SBIR project, that's what program we looked at that. How it affects the productivity of firms is another way of measuring the outcomes. How it determines and affects the survival and growth of companies that emerge from the initiative, if one of the objectives is to create entrepreneurial firms and that they be sustainable. We want to measure that. And then I think this is important because a lot of the initiatives that we launch to support, let's say, public investment in R&D also stimulates collaborations among colleges, and I've seen some evidence since I've been here of initiatives like that. And this is a good example, of course, this whole conference is a good example of a collaboration across universities, but also across firms and between universities and firms. Again, longer term impacts, which would be of by far the most interest to policymakers. Number one on the list, especially in these days, is job creation, but also how the projects and the programs affect regional and state economic growth. And also, how does this initiative, whether it's regional, whether it's national, how does it affect the ability of the region or the nation to attract firms to the region or the nation? And are there improvements in the quality of life that can arise from investment in public investment in innovation? And how does the project or the program or the initiative affect the ability of the region to innovate, or state? And these are not easy things to measure, but there are ways to operationalize it. So again, evaluation, my point for this whole kind of segment of the talk is that evaluation is critical. And evaluation needs to be conducted both by firms and by the institutions, or I guess you would call them agencies or entities that are supporting public investment in innovation and or entrepreneurship. There should be some evaluation. Now, why is all this important? I mentioned before, and this is blatantly obvious, I think, which is that R&D is an important source of economic growth, but it's really more specific than that. Economists talk about so-called general-purpose technologies. General-purpose technologies are technologies that have widespread use in downstream sectors and also lead to the creation of new industries. So going back in time, general-purpose technologies would be, let's say, the steam engine, electricity, computers and the internet, laser technology, telecommunications, biotechnology, and now we think nanotechnology. That this is going to lead to not just transforming manufacturing, not just transforming agriculture, let's say biotechnology does, not just transforming services, which is what computers and the internet have done, but also creating new industries, right? Isn't that exactly what happened with computers and the internet? It led to the creation of new industries, new firms. So it's very important to realize that these technologies are almost always developed, or at least, perfected, I think, developed at universities. So it's important to get these policies right. But I think it's even more broader. It's even broader than that. I was very much affected by a book written by William Baumol, who's probably the world's leading expert on entrepreneurship and innovation, who's still with us. And he has argued in trying to understand why economic performance in the U.S. is outstanding and consistently better than many other nations. He says that there's really, in order to understand that, you have to understand that there's two types of innovation. What he calls routine systematic innovation, which is primarily the domain of large multinational companies with R&D labs, IBM, General Electric, Xerox going back in time, all the major industrial corporations. And he said, well, America does this very well, but so does Europe. I mean, there's nothing special about the research labs, and routine systematic innovation is not where America has its competitive advantage. It's in the second class of innovation that he calls entrepreneurial innovation. And entrepreneurial innovation, he argues, is the domain mainly of small firms, and especially firms that emerge from universities. And he argues that it's this combination of the small firms, who are mainly emerging from the universities, and large firms that leads to the creation of wealth and, I think, improvements in economic performance. And one of the interesting trends that we've seen at universities, or at least since I've been studying them, is that universities are increasingly emphasizing the entrepreneurial dimension of technology transfer and commercialization, and that's a very, very good thing from this perspective. Universities, I think, can also be the intermediary of link between, that is, to make this symbiosis occur, and the linkage between the small entrepreneurial firms and the large firms who have the resources, like I said before, to really make the innovations work in the marketplace. The universities can play that role, and I think many are doing that. Now, let me just step back a little bit and talk about some of the changes that have been made in the U.S., which apply to this country as well, and try to explain the context in which these policy changes were made. The U.S. in the 1970s experienced a pervasive and long productivity slowdown. And at the same time, there was great concern about the Japanese challenge. Much as we hear today about China, in those days, the concern was that the Japanese were capturing global market share from American companies in key high technology industries, especially the semiconductor industry. And what could we do about it? Well, something magical happened at that time, which is that there was a broad bipartisan consensus and actually the will to take action. And really what emerged out of that consensus, which is still with us today, despite what you read in the papers about how much discord there is in Washington between the two political parties, there is no debate on these three policy changes that occurred at the time and have been sustained. The first is the expansion of public programs to support public-private partnerships, such as the ones I mentioned earlier. Some of these programs have matching funds from industry, so you have public funding and private funding matching for a particular project. The National Science Foundation, which traditionally had just sponsored basic research, was now encouraging universities to work with industries, engineering research centers, industry, university, cooperative research centers. So that was one aspect of the policy change. The other was relaxation of antitrust enforcement, not just to dissuade firms from doing collaborative research with other firms in the same industry, but actually promoting it, saying, look, we've got to protect our industries here, so we're going to actively support research joint ventures and develop such institutions as Semitech, which is now based at our university, where research is conducted for the benefit of the industry and supported by all the firms in the industry. And then finally, policies to promote the more rapid diffusion of technologies and intellectual property, let's say, from universities and national labs to firms. The most notable piece of legislation is the Bayh-Dole Act. But the SBIR program was also an important part of this initiative. The SBIR program stands for Small Business Innovation Research Program, and it's a federal program. It's run through the national agencies. So the Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health have very large research budgets, as they should, and 2.5% of their research budget is allocated to small firms. The firms, some of whom are based at universities or working with university investigators, will submit grant proposals that include material on the research that's being conducted, but also on the commercialization. So that's basically a public sector venture capital program. The government is not assuming any equity in the startups, but is just trying to promote the development of small firms that do research, and many of those firms are based at the university. And we just published a study which showed that the startups that emerge from this program that have a connection to the university tend to be much more successful in terms of their commercial success and their research success. So this program is very effective. But the Bayh-Dole Act is the one that has attracted the most attention because it's really brought universities into the business of managing intellectual property. All universities now have, research universities, have a tech transfer office or a tech licensing office, and there has been a concomitant rapid rise in any form of commercialization arising from universities, whether you measure it by patents, licensing, or startups. We've seen a dramatic rise and in the rate of commercialization. Not surprisingly, this has attracted a lot of attention in academia, and lots of academic studies of tech transfer offices and other aspects of academic entrepreneurship. Again, different units of analysis. Some studies are looking at agents, whether they be scientists or entrepreneurs. Others are looking at institutions, whether those are universities or property-based institutions that have been developed at or close to universities to promote academic entrepreneurship in some way, incubators, accelerators, science parks, technology parks. And also, there have been many studies that have looked at the corporate perspective on working with industry and how the experience that small firms have in working with industries to promote commercialization. So there's been a very large and growing academic literature, and lots of questions are being asked and answered. I think the most interesting ones are those that relate to performance, trying to figure out exactly how do you measure performance, why do some universities do better than others, what explains that, is that due to their positive environment, the region that they're located in, is it institutional, is it organizational? So you have a very vast amount of interdisciplinary research trying to answer some of these research questions. And I'm going to try to summarize that. Again, using, as I mentioned before, multiple indicators, numerous indicators of the output or the performance of the agents or the institutions. And those could be measures of the propensity of those agents to engage in commercialization, invention disclosures, patenting, licensing, startup creation. Or it could be measures of the scientific productivity of the agents, right? Patenting, publishing, citations. And then also, what is the growth and survival rate of university-based startups, some of the factors that might explain that. And also, how corporations do when they interact with universities. Is this something that they think is beneficial? So again, I'm going to try to summarize that, some of what I think of as the key results from this, that you should know about, from this literature. Let's talk first about Bayh-Dole. We now have a large body of empirical evidence on the effectiveness of the legislation that I mentioned earlier. That legislation basically gave the universities the right to own the intellectual property and manage it, which of course is not the norm, not the situation in many countries still. In many countries, it's the inventor. You have inventor ownership. You don't have university ownership. Well, I think it's pretty clear from the empirical evidence that Bayh-Dole legislation is effective. And again, this is based not on just on the US experience, but on international experience. The Technology Transfer Office is adding significant value. And part of the reason why they're adding significant value is because many faculty members are not disclosing inventions. We have now at least 3 or 4 studies, and maybe more, in the pipeline of faculty members bypassing the Technology Transfer Office. And the study that we did was even, I think, looked at a different dimension of this, is faculty are transferring technologies through consulting. They're not going through the formal mechanisms of the university administration. And so that's an important implication. Has important implications for the TTO. The TTO is necessary and needs to be expanded because they are doing a very important job in just simply eliciting disclosures. They also do a very important job in terms of educating the faculty nowadays about the process of commercialization and dealing now, even now, they're teaching faculty and students how to interact with entrepreneurs. So this is a very important function at the universities. And I mentioned that here. I think the other issue, as universities focus more on entrepreneurship, we have published several studies that have shown that universities that want to interact with entrepreneurs, and I know that this is one university that is working very aggressively in that direction, it's important to rely on surrogate entrepreneurs, to bring entrepreneurs to campus venture capitalists, angel investors, people who have expertise in entrepreneurship. We want academics to be entrepreneurs, and they are effective at certain tasks, but not at all of the tasks that are necessary for entrepreneurship to be successful. And so I would argue that the literature strongly suggests that if a university is moving in this direction, that they work with surrogate entrepreneurs. It helps to be private. It really does. I think private universities do better at this, in part because they have more flexibility. That doesn't mean that public universities can't try to adopt some of the same practices of private universities. It helps to have a medical school, but this is a university that has a very strong presence now in the biomedical arena, so that's helpful. I'm not sure if you have a medical school, but you do, so that gives you an advantage. Another really interesting development in this whole area is that universities are becoming more strategic in tech transfer and in their policies to promote this activity as well as academic entrepreneurship more broadly. There's a lot more heterogeneity. Remember, this is still relatively new for most major public universities even. And they are applying management theories to practice. We saw that. We did a conference several months ago at Johns Hopkins where we convened the tech transfer directors, major universities, and the academics who study them. And we could see that the ideas are being implemented. And I think that's important. I would also like to stress that one of the most important developments that we've seen is the business schools getting closely connected to the tech transfer offices. So if I had to make a recommendation, to the head of a business school, it would be work with the technology transfer office, because your students and your faculty have some, I think, a lot to offer and to help you commercialize, especially now that they're understaffed, I think. It's really helpful. We do field projects, and this is the other really important way to connect to industry. And we do field projects with firms that are interested in commercializing innovations at the university. Field projects in our school are year-long consulting projects that the students work on under faculty supervision for academic credit for local companies and organizations that want to commercialize an innovation at the university. So we've developed that into a formal program. It seems like that would be fertile ground here as well, if you're not already doing it.